Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this video is going to be a video by Mr. AKHi TV, who I probably like to review the most out of any other boxing channel that I could potentially review. And the reason why I like to review his channel the most is because AKHi TV, if you end up going to his channel or a channel like a Dante's Box Nation or a certain amount of these LDBC and new media channels as well, and also, ESPN and a certain amount of other media, sites, at first they can maybe seem like they have some good points and, that they're really trying to be somewhat good-hearted with their motivations. And I think that, to a degree that their heart is somewhat in the right place, but at the same time, I just think that a lot of these LDBC and new media channels just go a little bit too far in terms of some of the things that they always try to push. And, basically how the LDBC and the new media channels started was because that was a response to a certain amount of the coverage of the African American or the black fighters within the sport. And let me tell you this, I do think that the LDBC and new media channels are somewhat good for that of boxing content or good for that of boxing. And, a certain amount of people may disagree and they may say, why on earth would you say that? Especially, after you've reviewed so many videos from them and, overall you've claimed that they're really trying to push a lot of this bullshit. Well, for all intents and purposes, ESPN and a certain amount of other guys have also been trying to push a whole lot of bullshit. For many years, for those of you who ended up growing in the Floyd Mayweather Jr. era, which I ended up growing up in. Now, I got into boxing a little bit late at the tail end of his career when he started facing guys like Canelo Alvarez and Marcos Maidana and guys like that. So I really was only there for his last few professional boxing fights, at least against top level boxers. But when you're talking about Floyd Mayweather Jr., what the narrative was for so long from Bob Arum and ESPN and even certain other guys out there like Larry Merchant was that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was a quote unquote boring fighter, or that all he did was run, or that he's afraid of a loss and that he picks and chooses his opponents and that he ducks certain people. For those of you that do not remember, there was the narrative for the longest time that Floyd Mayweather Jr. avoided Sugar Shane Mosley until he became an ancient artifact. That was the narrative by certain people, and that eventually Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought Sugar Shane Mosley when he was just too old. Now, Sugar Shane Mosley was older when he fought Floyd Mayweather Jr. I think that he was about 38 years old. But Sugar Shane Mosley was actually at a very good point in his career. And this is what people talk about whenever they say that Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought people pretty much at a good point in their career. Now, is that me saying that every single fighter that Floyd fought was at the absolute best or peak of their career or was an undefeated fighter? No, not necessarily. But Sugar Shane Mosley, for example, for those of you that don't know, Floyd Mayweather Jr. actually in the past had called out Sugar Shane Mosley a multitude of times. He called him out, I believe, on two separate occasions. I believe one time it was in the 90s or in the early 2000s, and Sugar Shane Mosley declined against Floyd Mayweather Jr., as he probably should have at that time. And, of course, he fought Mr. Oscar De La Hoya, and of course ended up winning that fight, and I believe was debated as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter a little bit later on after that win, because, of course, that was when Oscar was looked at as, one of the big fish in boxing. But then later on, Floyd Mayweather Jr. called out Sugar Shane Mosley again when he was still, I believe, in his early to mid 30s. And Sugar Shane Mosley said that he couldn't do it because apparently he had a loose tooth or a toothache or a dental problem or something like that. A certain amount of people don't know that. Also, another thing as well is that Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, they had a possible negotiation to have the fight in 2010. And Manny Pacquiao pulled out of the negotiations when there was random VADA drug testing. And Manny Pacquiao claimed that apparently he was afraid of needles and all this other stuff. And all this other stuff. So once again, narrative travels around boxing for a very, very long time, but certain people may not actually know the truth. And a certain amount of the people overall that may not actually know the truth is because you have certain people like AKHi TV here, where a lot of the times when they really commentate on something or they're trying to analyze something, they're not really truly analyzing it from a logical or an objective point of view. And when you take a look at AKHi TV's videos and the LDBC and new media's videos, basically, they're a response to old media, but they're a very emotional response. It's like if you end up getting, in an argument with your significant other, and instead of, your woman or your man, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're, significant other, instead of them saying, okay, you know what, let's calm down, let's try to look at this logically and analyze, what's going wrong here. Instead of that response, it's the go fuck yourself and I don't need you, and and overall, you know what, I was always looking at your best friend Joey anyway. Basically the super emotional response, because their intent is not really to logically analyze things or to fix the problem, at least at the current moment in time. Their intent at that current moment in time is to cause the most amount of damage possible and to basically degrade you and embarrass you. And that's what AKHi TV's motivations, as well as Dante's Boxing Nations and a certain amount of these other LDBC and new media channels are, because they're an emotional response to a certain amount of the double standards and, some of the racial comments and racism that a lot of the American black fighters have had to deal with for a very long time now. And now when you have YouTube and a lot of platforms to where you can make boxing content, they're pretty much free, overall to do whatever they want. Just like ESPN and Ring Magazine and some of those other guys and Fox Sports were free to do whatever they wanted and comment on certain guys like Muhammad Ali or Sugar Ray Leonard or, Roy Jones Jr. or Floyd Mayweather Jr. So I understand where the LDBC and the new media channels are coming from. But once again, you're also never going to get a logical or a objective analysis from these guys, because they're just way, 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 way too emotional. Once again, it's like talking to a woman when she's angry. You just can't do it, because, overall, once again, you're not going to get a logical or an objective answer from her. She's always going to be super emotional. But once again, the reason why I thought that I would compare this, or the reason why I thought that I would talk about it, is because whenever it comes near to the end of an athlete's career or near to the end of their prime or whatever ends up happening, whether that athlete ends up being greater or finally accomplishing certain things that people did not see in the first place, certain people can maybe tend to overrate that athlete, or they can tend to start to underrate that athlete. Well, right now, Vasyl Lomachenko, it looks like his career is coming near to an end. He still is a champion, I believe, at the 135-pound weight class, but there's been rumblings of Vasyl Lomachenko possibly retiring. And to be honest with you, that might be the best thing for Vasyl Lomachenko. I mean, I believe the man is going to be 36 or 37 years old next year. I think he's going to be 37 actually. In February, I believe. And Usyk is going to be 38 next month in January. So I mean, it might be very close to these guys to retire. But there are certain things about Lomachenko that I think kind of go back and forth a little bit. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it once again is because AKHi TV is a big part of revisionist history. And what I mean by revisionist history is that he tries to put things in a certain perspective to where that's not shit that really happened. And I don't necessarily disagree, once again, with everything that AKHi TV says, but AKHi TV, once again, what he's going to try to say here about certain fighters like Lomachenko or Golovkin or Canelo is that those guys were the most overrated fighters of all time, and that you can't even put them in the same conversation with other great or all-time great level fighters, even though all those fighters have left their mark within history. That's why Alexander Usyk right now, once again, now that he's being compared to other all-time greats, AKHi TV is trying to diminish his level of competition, even though when his favorite black American fighter Deontay Wilder was there, they all ranked him top 4 or top 5 pound per pound for pretty much defeating nobodies in the heavyweight division. But once again, I don't want this intro to be a super, long one, over 10 minutes or anything like that. So once again, let's get into the video, because AKHi TV is going to try to make Vasyl Lomachenko's career just seemed like this guy that lost every big fight in his career and a guy that just ducked every single big fight in his career. And that's not what ended up happening. Now, that being stated, can we compare Lomachenko to a Floyd Mayweather or a Manny Pacquiao or a Canelo or, someone like a Alexander Usyk? Can we compare him to those fighters? Or a Sugar Ray Leonard? Can we put him in that same class? No, we can't, because he was not able to do what those fighters were able to do. Because if Vasyl Lomachenko was on that same level, he would have beat Teofimo Lopez clearly, and he would have beat Devin Haney clearly. Even though I think Bob Arum had a little bit to do with the scorecards against, Lomachenko with Teofimo Lopez, but he still deserved to lose that fight because he just didn't do enough. But once again, I understand the frustration that was coming with Lomachenko early, because he was being talked about as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter a little bit too early. But once again, AKHi TV he takes it from that spectrum of Lomachenko was being slightly overrated at that point to his career, to where he takes it to the complete other side of the spectrum and says, well, Lomachenko was just a complete failure and the most overrated fighter of all time. But once again, we're going to get into this. Let's see what AKHi TV has to say.
Gotta be fair across the board. You want to call this a duck? It's a duck. There's no doubt about it. It's literally a duck. But I think it's something deeper, man. And I keep saying that, but because Loma's the type of guy that don't duck any smoke. However,
Well, listen, Lomachenko has been willing to take a lot of bigger fights in his career. So the narrative that AKHi TV is going to try to propose in here, it doesn't really make any sense, at least if you logically know boxing. But once again, AKHi TV and these guys, they're not in a logical state of mind. Once again, they're in the revenge state of mind. They're in the, I have bitterness and I have, overall some resentment because of the way my favorite fighters or some of my black fighters or, black reporters were treated. So in return, I'm going to do the same to you. And that's why, once again, you cannot claim that these guys are really any better than ESPN or Ring Magazine. Now, don't get it twisted. Is that me saying that ESPN or Ring Magazine, once again, are any better than them or anything like that? No, not whatsoever. And is that me saying that sometimes that it is not okay to have maybe more of an extreme response? No. But when you're a boxing analyzer and when you want to talk about quote unquote the truth and, overall certain things that ended up happening, well, then that's when someone like me has to step in and say, no, that's not how things happen. That's how this happened. Because AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation will completely try to change history because they have a racial issue and they have a lot of bitterness and resentment towards a certain amount of the Caucasian media and a certain amount of also of the Caucasian and the Latino fans. So in return, overall, once again, they have created a certain amount of bitterness and they've been trying to tear down a lot of the elite Caucasian or Latino fighters now for a very long time because that's what ESPN and a certain amount of the mainstream boxing media was doing to Floyd Mayweather and other black fighters. And I get it, but once again, that's, if you want to call yourself logical or a truthful thinker, that's not how you act.
When I look at him and how he's been behaving as of late, I think about...
And in no way am I stating that that doesn't mean that you don't call out double standards or say certain things that maybe is not quote unquote politically incorrect. But once again, there's a difference between calling out racial double standards or double standards in boxing or in a particular sport or certain different standards that are being held for different people and completely trying once again to be completely emotional and changing history and changing certain things because you want to make this a type of political debate and you want to win in terms of overall who can tear down the most amount of fighters.
The fact that this isn't only once, this isn't one time, this is twice. Now, Shakur Stevenson, I believe, was a part. Well, Shakur Stevenson was a part of, Top Rank. They had Loma. Shakur wanted that fight. There was no way that Top Rank was on. I guess they couldn't. Loma said that he didn't want the fight. Pretty much said it. I didn't want the fight right now. So not only did he duck Shakur, he also ducked Tank. I think Loma knows that. Again, like I tell you guys all the time, fighters, we know what we can do, what we can't do. Loma,
and let me state this. Do I believe that Lomachenko has maybe avoided a couple of fights in his career? Yeah, I would say that. And he is going to have to be held accountable for certain things that maybe he did. But at the end of the day, once again, this narrative of Lomachenko just avoiding everybody in his career, no, that's not the case. Actually, when you talk about certain fighters that avoided Lomachenko, Gervonta Tank Davis pretty much avoided him for years, or at least overall really did not have a great interest in fighting him. Every time Lomachenko was brought up, he pretty much would piss his pants in the interviews. Mikey Garcia also avoided Vasyl Lomachenko, and for people that really don't know, Orlando Salido really wasn't trying to get in the rematch of Vasyl Lomachenko either. But the narrative is from the LDBC and the media guys. Let's be real, the pro-black cult. They keep trying to do this stuff where they say, well, Lomachenko avoided all those fights. No, he didn't. Now, to be fair, he did turn down Gervonta Tank Davis this year, so you can say that he avoided Gervonta Tank Davis this year, or that he pulled out of negotiations this year. But to say that Lomachenko just was always avoiding Gervonta Tank Davis or something like that, no, that's not the case.
Sure, and his team don't want him to go out one on his shield, getting knocked out or getting embarrassed. He fought Cambosis because he knew that was a fight that he can win, and he can win a belt. And go out on a high note. I think that this is it for Loma. I don't think Loma returns. And I only say that because...
That's very possible for Vasyl Lomachenko because, in all honesty, that just might be the best route for him to go. Because when you talk about Vasyl Lomachenko, once again, the man's going to be 37 years old, I believe, here in a couple of months. I believe that his birthday is sometime in February. He's going to be 37 years old very soon. On top of that, he's never really been a natural 135-pounder. So when you talk about the fights against Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Tank Davis, those are both fights that he possibly could win, but at this stage in his career, they're also, of course, very losable fights, and he probably wouldn't be favored in either one. So, I mean, if we're just talking about it from somewhat of a political standpoint or even a career standpoint, just in terms of how you're going to be remembered, it might actually be the best route of action for Vasyl Lomachenko to possibly retire. Because there are certain fighters to where after a couple of losses or after a loss or two, they should probably have retired earlier than what they did. Like when we take a look at Deontay Wilder, for example, Deontay Wilder, had he retired after the Fury fights, which I'm not going to say that he completely should have retired after the Fury fights, but, how different would Deontay Wilder's career have looked had he really only lost to Tyson Fury and really took no other losses in his career, not lost to Joseph Parker after that in a dominant way, and then got knocked out by Zhele Zhang, or Weili Zhang, whatever his name is, Big Bang Zhang, the big Chinese dude at the heavyweight division. How different would his career be talked about right now if he had just retired and said, you know what, I'm good. Of course, many people would still be calling him overrated and many people would still be blasting his career. And to a degree, in my view, Deontay Wilder was a bit overrated because he didn't really beat anybody other than Luis Ortiz or Bermane Stiverne. And I mean, the fact that he was in the conversation debatably as the best heavyweight of this era, I always thought that it was a bit ridiculous because I don't think it was ever proven. But, to be fair, he was one of the top 3, top 2 guys at one point in time. So, I mean, it is what it is. But, it's kind of the same thing with other certain fighters. Like when we take a look at Lomachenko. If Lomachenko retires right now, there's always going to be questions about, okay, well, maybe he could have beat Gervonta Tank Davis. Maybe he could have beat Shakur Stevenson. Maybe he could have beat this guy. Maybe he could have beat that guy. Lomachenko, by the time he was losing, was starting to get a little bit older. Now, whether you believe that that's the truth or not, certain people are going to remember it in that way. So that's why it might actually be the best thing for Lomachenko to retire because man's going to be 37 years old next year. And on top of that, like, once again, it just might be better for him, because if he ends up losing to either Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Tank Davis, then he is going to be remembered as a guy that lost a lot of the bigger fights in his career. Right now, he can maybe kind of slide by, at least with certain boxing fans, that Haney and Teofimo Lopez were a little bit bigger than him, and on top of that, A-grade level talents. And on top of that, he was a bit older against Devin Haney, if you want to mention that. Now, in my view, it's still not a viable enough excuse, because if you're going to be compared on the #1 pound-for-pound level or on the Mayweather or Pacquiao level, for example, who were 2 former #1 pound-for-pound fighters in the sport, then you have to beat both of those fighters. At least Teofimo Lopez. It is what it is. But once again, that's why it might be the best thing possible for Lomachenko to retire because, his career will be looked at probably as better if he were to retire. But AKHi TV also must know that a little bit, and that's a big part of the reason why he's trying to tear down Lomachenko right now, because what the narrative that they're kind of trying to put is that, well, Lomachenko didn't have more losses on his resume because he avoided this fight, and this fight. Well, there are also certain fighters that avoided him as well, including Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia. But we're going to talk about that as the video goes along.
Well, I'm glad Timothy Bradley's contract with ESPN is about to be up, since he keeps leaking the truth more and more and more. This is why they hire people like Timothy Bradley to keep their mouth sealed. As you guys heard, Timothy Bradley said the truth is Lomachenko ducked both Shakur and Gervonta. If you want to stop there, that's cool.
And listen, at the end of the day, Vasyl Lomachenko is at an older point in his career. Do I think that he's in his absolute peak anymore? No, I do not. I still do believe that he's at a good point in his career because he just came off of a knockout victory over George Kambosos. And before then, he gave Devin Haney one hell of a fight, whether you believe that he won the fight or not, But, and on top of that, he clearly was undersized. But, I mean, is what it is. If you're a champion of that weight class and you claim that you want these opportunities, you claim you want to be undisputed, then you got to take those opportunities. So Lomachenko is going to have to be held accountable for that.
T. Bradley is only talking about the recent ducks by Lomachenko, not the overall. If you want to talk about the overall, I told you guys on my previous video, Lomachenko avoided Crawford at a catchweight of 137 when Bud...
Right, but let me bring up this point very quickly. And keep in mind that AKHi TV, and this is what I mean that they don't keep the same standards, and that many sports fans, and that's the problem with fanatics. That's the problem with fans. When you, even say something critical that might be, to be quite honest with you, the truth, they're never going to take it in that way. They're going to take it as a personal attack because fans are basically in love or infatuated with that particular athlete. So when you end up saying something that's critical, or if you say this person is above that certain person, they basically take it as a personal attack. They basically take it as if you slap their father or their mother right in front of their face. Because once again, fanatics overall are in a delusional state of mind. So once again, they're not going to think logically whatsoever. Now, isn't AKHi TV the same person? Because I reviewed this video not too long ago, about a couple weeks ago. Jaron Boots-Ennis, who recently just ended up pulling out of the Vergil Ortiz negotiations at 154. Jaron Boots-Ennis, to be fair, I didn't criticize him that much because he stated that he wanted to unify 147. That's why I don't, criticize him too much. Now, is there anyone at 147, in my view, that's as good as Vergil Ortiz? No. But, I understand where he's coming from. It's not like he did not, say that at all in the past and then all of a sudden just decided to do it. I think it was a mistake in my view, but, overall, he did it. He's still going to be held accountable for it, but, I understand why he did it. But this is the same person that AKHi TV, where he said that, well, Jaron Boots-Ennis can't be ducking Vergil Ortiz because Vergil Ortiz is not even in the same weight class. How can you duck someone and they're not even in the same weight class? But then he turns around, talks about Gennady Golovkin and says how he ducked Arasani Lara, even though Lara, when Golovkin was around at 160, never fought at 160, never fought above 154, and now he ducked Andre SOG Ward, and Andre SOG Ward never fought at 160 either, and then now we're doing this shit where Terrence Bud Crawford had not fought at 135 for a very long time. It would have been at a catchweight fight because Crawford was not going to make it all the way down to 135. So, I mean, you're talking about a fighter that was a decent amount bigger than Lomachenko. That would have been probably 15 to 20 pounds bigger than him because Terrence Bud Crawford was rehydrating at about 160 plus still, even at that time at 140. He would have had a 9-inch reach advantage over him. And on top of that, even if Lomachenko does beat Crawford, it's at a catchweight. So, I mean, it's pretty much a lose-lose situation for Lomachenko. Why would you really want to get in that fight? You win against Terrence Bud Crawford, and people, might say, well, it pretty much was at a catchweight. You lose against Terrence Bud Crawford, and I mean, of course, that's also bad as well because it might completely change your career, even though Crawford is a decent amount bigger. Like, come on, man.
Challenged him to a fight to determine who is pound for pound #1 in the world at that time. There was an argument and a debate made by old media to discredit Crawford. Well,
no, it wasn't made to discredit Terrence Bud Crawford. The reason why Lomachenko was looked at as the #1 pound for pound fighter, and I know a lot of, people are not going to like this, but Vasyl Lomachenko had a better resume at that time. People can like that, they can not like that. Now, if you're talking about when Lomachenko was debated by Teddy Atlas as the #1 guy, when he had about 8 fights, then yeah, of course, that's a different situation. But people try to pretend like Nicholas Walters at one point in time was not looked at as the most dangerous guy in that particular weight class, and Lomachenko just wiped the floor with him. That Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Lomachenko, that these same guys like AKHi and Dante, they were actually claiming that Lomachenko was avoiding Guillermo Rigondeaux. Keep in mind that Rigondeaux was about 2 weight classes lower. Then the fight finally happens, and they said, oh, well, Rigondeaux had a year layoff. Rigondeaux was 2 weight classes lighter. And absolutely, he definitely was 2 weight classes lighter. That's definitely, something that is a valid excuse. But, I mean, at the end of the day, once again, don't do this bullshit where you claim overall that, he's ducking this guy, he's ducking that guy. And then overall, that fight finally happens, and then you just have more excuses. So, once again, that's why I say AKHi TV is no different than any other racist or pro-racial fan out there. That's why you can never trust his logic or objectiveness because he doesn't have any.
Lomachenko rejected the fight. He responded to Crawford.
Right, as he should have, because that was a lose-lose situation for Lomachenko. Why the fuck you want to go into a fight for where if you end up winning, people can just make the excuse overall to where it was just at a catchweight, overall. And then, if you end up losing that fight, I mean, Crawford is like, what? He's 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. Like, come on, man. Are you kidding me? Terrence Bud Crawford is at least a dude that should be fighting at welterweight, especially at that point in time in his career. So the fact that Lomachenko did not take that fight, that's not a duck, man. There was no reason for that fight to happen. Crawford was way too big to even get in the ring with Lomachenko.
Challenged by saying, I will never fight Crawford. Not just that, he also said, Crawford is pound for pound #1. Until Crawford moved up to 147, that's when all of a sudden Lomachenko said, oh, I'm now pound for pound #1, since Bud is far away from me. That's what you call when you around me, I'm going to be quiet. But when you leave, I'm going to start talking shit. Excuse my French. Anyways, after that, Lomachenko turned down the Manny Pacquiao fight at 135. His excuse...
Yes, when Manny Pacquiao hadn't fought there in years. Manny Pacquiao was fighting at the welterweight division now for a very, very long time. And had Manny Pacquiao fought him at 135 pounds, not only would have people said that you beat an older man, but on top of that, people would have said that Pacquiao had not fought in that weight class in years, and you pretty much brought him down 2 weight classes. Once again, how can you claim that Lomachenko ducked a Manny Pacquiao in a Crawford fight? Lomachenko is pretty much a natural 130-pounder, to be honest with you, at a maximum. And second of all, when you talk about it once again, Lomachenko had not even fought one fight at 140. So how the hell can you claim overall that he avoided Terrence Bud Crawford and Manny Pacquiao? Like, dude, those guys were at the welterweight division pretty much at that time. Pacquiao was at the welterweight division. The lowest he probably would have came down is at 140. And Lomachenko was not even a dude that had fought one fight at 140. Then once again, he's in the same situation where if he fights Pacquiao at a weight drain, overall people are just going to make excuses. So why the hell would he want to take that fight, man? Like, come on.
This was, oh, Pacquiao is too old. Even though,
like, that's like me saying some stupid shit overall. Like, if I was against Terrence Bud Crawford saying, like, oh, well, Yanabek, he offered Terrence Bud Crawford a catch weight, not completely at 154, but at 157, overall. And, Terrence Crawford is a pussy if he doesn't take it. Like, that makes no sense because that's a complete lose-lose situation for Terrence Bud Crawford. There's nothing in him for that.
Manny Pacquiao, right after Lomachenko said that, went on to beat Adrian Broner and Keith Thurman. Before that, he beat Matisse, Jesse Vargas, and Timothy Bradley. So
he beat Lucas Matisse, but Lucas Matisse was basically done at that point in time in his career. And that's not me trying to diminish Pacquiao's resume. We all know that the man has an all-time great resume. But just to talk about that fight really quickly, Matisse was done. After he got knocked out by Postol, maybe he had 1 or 2 more fights at 140. I can't remember. But from what I remember, he moved up to the welterweight division. I can't remember if he actually won a belt there or not. I can't remember. But he was done. And that's why that was the first knockout win that Pacquiao had in many years, because Matisse literally had no punch resistance after that. He had no punch resistance, none whatsoever, after he got knocked out by Victor Postol, who, of course, Terrence Crawford ended up having a great performance over.
We all know that was nothing but an excuse. If you want to talk about ducks, let's open the duck book. I got that.
Right, but then if you're going to go by those standards, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, but if you're going to go by those standards in AKHi TV, by your own admission, you have to call Jerome Butenis a duck for not taking the Virgil Ortiz fight, man. Like, come on.
Book as we speak. I'm reading you guys the history of the duck book when it comes to Lomachenko. After that, Mikey Garcia actually pulled up on Lomachenko, challenging him to a fight as a unified champion.
And this is going to be the next part of the video that they're going to try to use. Now, what you hear many of the LDBC and new media guys try to claim is that, well, Lomachenko turned down a fight with Mikey Garcia. He did turn down a fight with Mikey Garcia, and the reason why he turned down a fight with Mikey Garcia is because, according to Lomachenko's own admission, just the fight prior, he had a torn shoulder. Lomachenko had just moved up to the 135-pound weight class. He challenged the #1 champion there, which was Jorge Linares. Now, the most talented guy, I would say, was Mikey Garcia, but the #1 guy that was ranked there at the time was Jorge Linares, And, no offense against Mikey Garcia, but, it's very interesting. These LDBC and new media guys, at one point in time or another, they've always torn down whatever elite non-black fighters that were of the era, whether it be Juan Manuel Marquez or whether it be Canelo or whether it be, Vasyl Lomachenko, Golovkin, or some of these other guys. The one person that was around during those eras that they never tear down? Mikey Garcia. You know what? You know why they never talk about Mikey Garcia? Because they realize that Mikey Garcia is not a threat. Mikey Garcia was an exceptionally talented fighter. He's a Hall of Famer in my view. But when you really take a look at his resume is really underwhelming. There's not really one fight that you can take a look at Mikey Garcia's career and you say, wow, like there's a potential top 10, top 20 pound per pound level fighter on there. Like, not one. That's why no one talks about Mikey Garcia, because he ain't never fought shit. Mikey Garcia was a dude that could have fought Gamboa back in the day. He didn't fight him. He could have fought Lomachenko, or at least stayed at 135. He didn't do that. He could have fought Jorge Linares at 135. He didn't do that. And I mean, you want to talk about another person that could have fought Crawford. Mikey Garcia was bigger than Lomachenko, as you see here. He could have been the one to fight Terrence Bud Crawford, because at least he had a fight later on at 140. And then later on would fight at 147 and beat Jesse Vargas. But, isn't it interesting? He never... Mikey never gets criticized from these guys. You know why that is? Once again, because Mikey's never talked about. They know that Mikey Garcia is not a threat. But Canelo Alvarez, they're all up in his ass because once again, they realize that Canelo has accomplished great things.
Garcia had 2 titles. Lomachenko had 2 titles. Mikey Garcia just finished beating Adrian Broner and Robert Easter, 2 of his biggest wins of his career. Mikey Garcia at that time was on fire.
Yes, and what Mikey Garcia decided to do, like the little snake that he was, no offense against Mikey Garcia, I don't know him personally, but this dude slithered in and out of weight division. Like the way that the LDBC and New Media talks about Canelo Alvarez, and don't get it twisted, I'm not saying that Canelo has just taken every single fight in his career, but Canelo has a great resume. He has about 11 A-grade wins that you could debate as A-grade. If not 11, then about, maybe 10. But the thing is about Mikey, the way that they were talking about Canelo, about how he slithers in and out of weight divisions and fights like these bum-ass fighters, who that really was Mikey Garcia. Once again, that's why, when you take a look at his resume, you ain't never going to find one sensational fighter on there. Now, there's some decent fighters on there, like Orlando Salido or Adrian Broner or Jesse Vargas or, Zlatan Tsichning or whatever the fuck that one dude from Montenegro's name was, the dude who was the first one to knock out or beat Ivan Redkach, who was a sensational amateur, I believe, but a very poor performer in the pros, at least compared to the standards that were laid upon him. But that's why, once again, that's why no one talks about Mikey Garcia's resume, man. No one talks about him like that because they know that he ain't never fought shit.
You guys know Lomachenko. Instead of accepting the challenge, he was giving Mikey Garcia advice on what he did wrong. But he didn't have the cojones to accept Mikey Garcia's challenge.
Because he had a completely torn shoulder with torn ligaments and completely dislocated his shoulder and still beat Jorge Linares in that fight, which was his first fight at 135. That's the reason why that fight didn't happen. And then he said, I need another fight before I fight Mikey Garcia. He fought Jose Pedraza, then immediately called him out. And then by that time, Mikey Garcia slithered his ass out of that weight class and said, oh, well, I want to accomplish greatness. I want to fight Errol Spence Jr. So the same route that Kell Brook took. And the reason why Mikey Garcia and the reason why these fighters do that is because they realize that they have the potentiality to lose that fight. And if they lose that fight at their natural weight class, they don't have any excuses to why they lost that fight. Because that fighter is either their own same size or possibly even a little bit smaller than them. And as you can tell here, Lomachenko is smaller than Mikey Garcia. He's a bit smaller than him. He's not as girthy, nor does he have that big ass head. But it is what it is. But when it comes down to the overall, once again, Mikey Garcia then said, "Oh, I wanna accomplish greatness and all that bullshit." No, he didn't. Mikey Garcia was in a win-win situation. Had he beat Errol Spence Jr., he would have been on top of the world, debatably the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, or at least top 5, top 3 at a minimum on everybody's list. But if he lost, then he can just get the size excuse. So once again, that's the same reason why Kell Brook went up there, because if they get their ass kicked by Errol Spence Jr., and then later on they face that person like a Spence or a Lomachenko, they can claim 10, 15, 20 years later on down the line to their fans and then lie to themselves in the mirror and say, oh, well, I was never really quite the same after that first loss. It was a big mistake and I had too much damage on me. That's the reason why I lost to that fighter, because some of these fighters, they can't take it when they possibly lose. So that's the mentality of those fighters. That's why they do that shit. And Mikey Garcia was doing that, but I think that he was getting close to retire anyway, because Mikey Garcia, to be quite honest with you, I don't think Mikey Garcia was ever as interested in boxing as his other family members. If you take a look at Mikey Garcia in some of his interviews, he was very clearly kind of already had one foot out the door anyway, or he was thinking about it, because Mikey Garcia, he just didn't, some of these guys, like, they love boxing. That's their life. Like, when you talk about Canelo Alvarez, he eats, shits, and breathes boxing. He does nothing but train, and, I'm not going to say he doesn't do anything but train, but that's what he mainly does. Mikey Garcia, you can tell that boxing was just, it was what he was supremely talented in, but it wasn't his love.
He said, I'm dealing with an injury. But ironically, though, Lomachenko made his return before Mikey Garcia did. He ended up fighting a tomato can.
Well, he fought Jose Pedraza, who I wouldn't necessarily call a tomato can, but someone that definitely wasn't on the level of a Mikey Garcia. Or maybe he fought someone else before then. I can't remember. But after he fought Jose Pedraza, he called out Mikey Garcia multiple times. He called out Mikey Garcia multiple times even after the Jose Pedraza fight. And Mikey Garcia, which is the fact that AKHi TV, he fails to bring up this fact. After that, Mikey Garcia never returned to the 135-pound weight class again, and he relinquished his 135-pound title. He could have returned there and possibly challenged Lomachenko. He still had his title, but instead he decided to vacate it. But AKHi TV won't tell you that.
Cherry pick instead of a unification with Mikey Garcia for undisputed.
Right, but once again, Mikey Garcia knew damn well that Lomachenko was more than likely not going to be able to take that fight. He completely tore his shoulder. You know, this is the same dude, once again, that claims that, you know, oh, Canelo, he's fighting Jermell Charlo off of a broken hand injury, which, by the way, is a way less worse injury than a completely dislocated shoulder. And you know, a torn up shoulder. Like, come on, man, are you fucking kidding me? But once again, that's how disingenuous this dude is.
His dream. Mikey Garcia could have had made his undisputed dream come to reality. All he had to do was fight Mikey Garcia, who was
you know, and once again, many people call certain fighters a quote-unquote cherry picker, like Floyd Mayweather or Lomachenko or Canelo or a certain fight or Pacquiao, whatever. Listen, there's no fighter that you're going to find really within the history of boxing that is just accepted any fight at any given time 100% of the time. But you want to talk about a legit cherry picker? Mikey Garcia was a legit cherry picker. He was a legit cherry picker. Any big fighter that was potential top 10 pound for pound or was a huge threat at one point in time in their weight class, whether it be Gamboa, Lomachenko, he didn't fucking fight him. So once again, that's why Mikey Garcia, he's never talked about today. Even Mexican fighters that have multiple losses on their record, like Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales, are still talked about today because they at least have some decent wins. Like Barrera has wins over Nassim Hamed. He has wins over Eric Morales. He has wins over other fighters. You know, Morales has a win over Marco Antonio Barrera. He has a win over Manny Pacquiao. You know, he has a few other great wins that I'm probably not remembering. Mikey don't have really one great win in his career. At least when you talk about one that people are really going to give a shit about.
available and begging him to fight. Lomachenko, when Mikey Garcia pulled up on him, he had already done the surgery. He was already good to fight, but he wanted a tune-up. Ironically,
right, as he should have. He wanted a tune-up after, overall the shoulder injury, which is completely acceptable.
though, Mikey Garcia was willing to wait for Lomachenko. However, like
bullshit, no, he wasn't. For those of you overall that remember what happened, no, he wasn't, because when the Jose Pedraza fight ended up happening and Lomachenko said, "I want to fight Mikey Garcia, I'm ready," Mikey Garcia was fucking out of that weight class. He was missing. So come on, man.
I said before, Lomachenko completely turned down the fight, and that's when Mikey Garcia decided to vacate his titles, since he felt Bob Arum wasn't gonna give him.
No, he fucking he left that weight class because he said, "I now have an excuse to the public, overall, to say why the Lomachenko fight didn't happen. Now I can blame it on him, and now this is my opportunity to escape." Come on, man.
He wanted if Lomachenko said no. That's why Mikey Garcia moved up to 147 to fight Errol Spence, the worst decision of his career.
No, actually, it was the best decision of his career, because he would have probably lost to Lomachenko. I mean, it could have been either way. Mikey Garcia was a relatively talented fighter. It would have been one of the bigger fights in boxing, but it wasn't going to happen because Mikey didn't want that fight. And I think Mikey possibly wanted a fight with Manny Pacquiao to pretty much get a paycheck. That's why he wanted that fight so bad. To get pretty much paid out, whether he was going to win or lose. He didn't give a fuck whether he won or lost that fight. Mikey Garcia just wanted a payday, and then he was going to call it a career. Mikey had no motivation at that point in time. Like I said, he always pretty much had one foot in the door with boxing, I think, anyway. So, I mean, it is what it is.
Because Errol Spence ended his career, basically. If you think that's bad, Lomachenko actually avoided the rematch with the first man that beat him, Salido.
And we're also going to talk about this, which is an important part of the history of Lomachenko as well. But let's see what AKHi TV has to say, or let's see what he's going to try to portray.
Since he did not want to visit or revisit the Mexican school. Ever since Salido took Lomachenko to the Mexican school, Lomachenko...
It's interesting that AKHi TV says that Orlando Salido took him to the Mexican school, but he won't say that Ryan Garcia took Devin Haney to the Mexican school. It's very particularly interesting, although Orlando Salido wasn't caught on PEDs. Before Ryan Garcia was even caught on PEDs, these dudes were crying about how Devin Haney was cheated because Ryan Garcia missed weight by 3 pounds. Vasyl Lomachenko, for those of you that don't know the backstory of the fight, Orlando Salido missed weight by 2 pounds. He missed weight by 2 pounds in that fight. Overall, he weighed in fight night at about 147 pounds. Lomachenko weighed in at 136, only 10 pounds over the weight limit on fight night, but he made weight. Orlando Salido didn't. He was stripped of his title. And he was paid $250,000 for the first Vasyl Lomachenko fight. You know, so and if you take a look at that fight, Orlando Salido threw about 200 low blows in that fight. Now, is that the only reason why Vasyl Lomachenko lost that fight? No, it's not. He should have adjusted better. But, I mean, to be fair to the man, he fought a champion in his second professional fight, so he was going to have a little bit of a hard time adjusting. That's just how it was. But AKHi TV, once again, being as disingenuous and as, you know, politically driven as what he is, you know, he's not going to keep the same standards or tell you any of those points. Isn't that interesting, once again, about how Devin Haney was quote-unquote cheated because of the weight? Now, of course, Ryan Garcia was caught on PEDs as well. Now, in my view, Devin Haney's on PEDs because he's with the snack program, but that's a conversation for another time. But, you know, isn't that interesting? They said that Ryan Garcia cheated because that means Devin Haney was more drained because he had to lose more weight. Well, where's the same things for Lomachenko? You know, once again, isn't that interesting? None of these guys ever brought that up. You know, it's almost never brought up when these guys talk about it.
Never fought a real Mexican-style fighter. He avoided that style. That's why he
didn't avoid shit in terms of the Mexican style. He fought Orlando Salido for a second professional fight. They tried in order to get the fight with Mikey Garcia. He avoided him like the bubonic plague. You know, overall, once again, and then you talk about, you know, he came in, offered Lomachenko an offer when he knew damn well he wasn't going to accept it. You know, because he had that torn shoulder the fight prior. Like, come on, man.
never fight a Pitbull Cruz, which is why he turned down the Salido rematch. Talking about Lomachenko.
Well, Lomachenko eventually did turn down the Salido rematch, but if you take a look at the article here, it says, shit money, fuck off. Why Vasyl Lomachenko versus Orlando 2 fell apart. That wasn't Lomachenko talking, that was Salido. Now, keep in mind, the first time that the fight happened between Lomachenko and Salido, that Orlando Salido received $250,000. And that was when he was a champion at the time. Lomachenko, when he was going to fight him potentially in the rematch, Salido was offered $750,000 or $725,000 for that fight. Now, some people may say, well, that's a little bit low, right? But Lomachenko was only getting paid about $1 or $2 million at that time. And when it was when he became clearly a bigger star in the sport of boxing. So you're not gonna get paid much more than that, especially when you're not a superstar gate attraction. So the truth is, the reason why that fight really fell apart is because they tried to make that rematch. Orlando Salido really didn't want it because he realized that Lomachenko more than likely got better as an all-around fighter. And he realized that Lomachenko would probably become a great star later on, and that one win that he had against Lomachenko, that it probably was going to hold much more value than any of the other wins in his career. And that's pretty much what ended up happening. And he knew that Lomachenko was probably going to adjust to him in the rematch. Possibly any dirty shit that he'd do because he threw a ton of low blows in that fight. But it never gets mentioned, at least by AKHi TV and these dudes. But we all know why that is. Because they have a bitterness towards Lomachenko. But, you know, it's whatever. But Lomachenko more than likely probably would have whooped his ass in the rematch. But Orlando Salido said, ain't no way that I'm getting my ass whooped and possibly having the biggest win in my career looked at as different. And then overall, I'm only getting $725,000 for it. Ain't no way. That's basically what ended up happening. And then later on, when the fight possibly could have happened again, when Orlando Salido ended up losing to Roman Martinez. Now, to be fair, a lot of people thought that those fights were controversial. To be fair, I never watched them myself, so I can't tell you. Then Lomachenko would go on, I believe, to fight Roman Martinez, and he would knock him out fairly easily.
The spoiled Lomachenko used the excuse Salido wants more money to fight. Well, duh, he beat you. You the one that lost, not him.
Right, but once again, this was not an immediate rematch. Lomachenko, this was several fights later when this had occurred. So once again, this shit about Orlando Salido asking for more than $725,000, bro, you're not going to get much more than around that because no offense against you, Orlando Salido, you were not this Stargate attraction. And even Lomachenko, who was starting to become a bigger star in the sport, he was only getting paid like $1 or $2 million. So what, you think you're going to get paid as much as Lomachenko? That would be like Conor McGregor, you know, possibly having a rematch against Joseph Duffy. For those of you that remember when Conor McGregor was becoming a bigger star in the UFC, Joseph Duffy, I believe, was one of the first guys to defeat Conor McGregor. I think that he submitted him, but then later on, he ended up not being the fighter that Conor McGregor would be. That would be like Joseph Duffy saying, well, you know what? I beat you several fights ago, Overall. So, even though you have all the star power in the UFC, I think that I'm entitled to the same amount of money because I beat you in that first fight. Bro, that's not how the fight game works. The fight game works in terms of the amount of money that you get, in terms of how much you earn, in terms of an attraction. Now, if you're talking about an immediate rematch or something like with Floyd Mayweather and Oscar De La Hoya, then okay, it's understandable, but it wasn't an immediate rematch.
So of course he's gonna want more money, a fair split. Lomachenko
Wouldn't have been a fair split at all. Once again, in terms of boxing, you get what you earn. There's an A side, there's a B side, and at that moment, Orlando Salido would have been the B side. He didn't want the fight, once again, because he wanted to milk that win. He knew that that'd be the best win of his career, and he said, if I'm fighting Lomachenko, you're going to have to pay my ass. That's the reason overall, once again, why he said that shit. And certain people may say overall, well, he was, entitled to a little bit of that money. But at the end of the day, once again, it's not like Orlando Salido is like a Canelo Alvarez, where Canelo can pretty much ask for whatever, amount of cash that he wants, because he says, listen, dude, I'm the face of boxing. And on top of that, I've given you guys a ton of good fights. So you either pay my ass or I'm just going to fight some of these other fighters.
at that time was getting around $2 million a fight. For that rematch, he probably
Right. So you thought that Orlando Salido was going to get $2 million, against Lomachenko, and Lomachenko is becoming one of the bigger stars in the sport. You think that Orlando Salido is going to get paid the same amount as Vasyl Lomachenko? Come on, man.
was gonna get.
And AKHi TV is an idiot, but not even he's that stupid. Like, come on.
Close to 3. Meanwhile, Salido, he got offered $720,000. He said, hell no. He wanted a fair split. Close.
That was a fair split. Once again, you're not a big star in the sport of boxing. You were no longer a champion. Vasyl Lomachenko was a champion. And on top of that, he was the A side. Period. Point blank. People can like it. They can not like it. At the end of the day, there are certain fighters that end up losing even in an immediate rematch, and they're still the B side. Like Andrew Ruiz, for example, he still was the B side against AJ Anthony Joshua. And AKHi TV knows this type of shit. But, at the end of the day, once again, he's having a completely different standard because, once again, he can't stand Lomachenko's ass. He can't stand these fighters. But it is, is what it is. Anyway.
To a 50-50 split, which is more than fair to ask.
No, absolutely is not more than fair to ask, because once again, there is something known as the business side of boxing. Even if Canelo Alvarez and Dimitri Bivol, for example, end up getting in the rematch, Dimitri Bivol is not going to be the A side in that in those negotiations, man. Now, to be fair, I mean, Bivol, he might have a little bit more negotiation because that was when, Canelo was more at the peak of his career or closer to it, But Lomachenko, on top of that, was just getting started. He had not had as much, reveal to the boxing public as yet. So his star had grew as well as his resume. So a 50-50 split was just not going to happen, man.
As the man who first beat Lomachenko. At that time, Loma only had 1 loss. However, I guess they felt they could erase the loss instead of Lomachenko going in the ring, fighting Salido again to prove that he can deal with that type of style, the Mexican style. But clearly Lomachenko was worried about Salido. That's why he avoided him instead of giving Salido.
He didn't avoid shit when it came to Orlando Salido. He didn't avoid him. You can't avoid a quote-unquote non-champion, and then you try to get in the rematch with him. You offer him about 3 times more, actually a little bit more than that, than what you did the first time around. And then he's no longer even a champion. And then that guy says, no, I want to be paid more, even though Lomachenko is only getting paid $1 to $2 million per fight at that point in time in his career. No, Orlando Salido is the one that avoided that rematch. And then by the time that they talked about a potential rematch happening again, Lomachenko said, there's really no reason for me to fight you. Because at the end of the day, I'm on to bigger things. He fought actual champions. He fought guys that were ranked higher in the weight class. And Orlando Salido, whether you think that he won the fight or not, he had lost to Roman Martinez at that point. So Lomachenko afterwards, he just fucked up Roman Martinez, and he kept moving forward.
What he wanted for the rematch in order to avenge his loss. Well, the ducking didn't stop there for Lomachenko, as he avoided Devin Haney by vacating his WBC belt while...
Well, that is the one point that I pretty much agree with AKHi TV in this video. Vasyl Lomachenko clearly seen Devin Haney as a potential threat, and on top of that, just not worth the time as what he was at the current moment in time. Yes, Lomachenko did avoid that Devin Haney fight early on in his career. Now, I've had a certain amount of people overall tell me that they thought Haney avoided Lomachenko. I don't really know. To be fair, maybe if you can point out why you believe that, that's up to you. But it was very clear that Lomachenko, when he took the WBC franchise title, and on top of that, he was not interested in the Haney fight. He knew that Haney was going to be a relative threat because of his size and his length, and on top of that, because he's a decently talented fighter. But of course, that also could have been because he was trying to get the super fight with Teofimo Lopez, which of course you see right here, and then Lomachenko, even though the fight was a bit closer, I think, than what the scorecards alleged, he still deserved to lose that fight because he just didn't do enough in the first half. I think that he thought that Lopez was going to be a lot more tired than what he actually was in the second half of the fight, and that he wasn't going to be as good as what he was. But it was very clear that the body work, and on top of that, that the level of power that Lopez has, that it just bothered him.
Chasing undisputed, completely contradicting himself just to avoid Devin Haney. He gave up on his dream. He tried to fake history by making up history. But ironically, he ended up losing anyway to Teofimo Lopez when they unified the division. Years later, when Devin Haney became undisputed, Lomachenko was forced to fight Devin Haney, since Devin Haney had all of the titles, and he also lost to Devin Haney.
And a very good fight, by the way, which in my view could have went either way. Now, there's certain people that state that, I thought, Lomachenko clearly won that fight 8 rounds to 4. I don't see that because there were still certain rounds where Lomachenko, in my view, didn't throw enough. And then, of course, you got on the other side of the coin where you got people on Devin Haney's side where they say, well, I think Devin Haney won that fight 9 rounds to 3. Well, I don't see any possible way how Haney won that fight 9 rounds to 3 with the way he was getting banged up in some of those rounds. But that being stated, just because Lomachenko had a few fantastic rounds doesn't mean that he won the full fight. But I thought that it was a fight that could have potentially went either way. But I knew that if the fight was close, that they were probably going to give it to Haney because Lomachenko was a 35-year-old Eastern European Caucasian fighter. Why the hell would they want you transgressing forward when they have a Black American young fighter that they can make a multitude of fights with? Once again, the LDBC and new media, they keep trying to make this narrative about how they want these Eastern Caucasian European fighters or these Caucasian fighters to be the face of boxing. Now, the media does, but when you talk about the real guys behind the scenes, including Bob Arum, they don't want that shit, at least for a long time, because they realize the marketability between Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney and certain guys like that, because when you talk about certain sports, you also have to realize where your marketability is at. And even though Eastern European fighters, they're a great contender, you don't want them for the face of your league for a particularly long time because, first of all, a lot of them don't speak great English. Second of all, they don't have a whole lot of American backing, and they don't have as much backing as what the American Latinos or the Latino fighters do, or the American Black fighters. Those are the main fighters that they really want eventually to be popular because those are the guys that create a certain amount of money. That's why Bob Arum was, smiling from ear to ear when Teofimo Lopez ended up doing it, and he said that shit about, the scorecards are too far apart. He paid that one bitch, or he paid whoever to score 9 rounds to 3. Now, I thought Lomachenko lost, but it wasn't no 9 rounds to 3. When it came down to it, Lomachenko, Bob Arum, he was perfectly fine with Lomachenko losing that fight. And you want to know another example of, once again, about that theory is because for those of you that remember Josh Taylor versus Jose Ramirez, Josh Taylor ended up beating Jose Ramirez. He knocked him down twice in that fight, and the scorecards, they tried to score that fight a fucking draw. There was 2 judges that scored that fight 6 rounds to 6, nowhere near 6 rounds to 6, but they had to score it in favor of Josh Taylor, overall because he knocked him down twice. And you got Bob Arum's ass, his fucking dirty ass, overall, paying off judges and shit, overall saying that fight was a disgrace. That fight should have been a lot closer. All this are bullshit because he didn't want Josh Taylor to win that fight because he knew that Jose Ramirez was going to have a huge Mexican following and a huge Mexican-American following. So once again, just complete horse shit. But, once again, so these guys, they keep trying to claim all this stuff about, a lot of these Eastern European fighters, they get the advantage in the, a lot of boxing. Well, they get the advantage in terms of the coverage of the media, and they also get the advantage in terms of not being called boring fighters and by the fans. But in terms of judging or anything like that, no. Like AKHi TV and these guys kept trying to claim this bullshit about how Fury, because he's Caucasian, got the he got the long count over Deontay Wilder. All that is bullshit. Caucasian fighters, especially during this modern time, especially the Eastern Europeans, Never once have I ever seen an Eastern European fighter over a dominant Black American or Latino fighter ever get the benefit of the doubt in a decision. Never. I never seen it with Golovkin and Canelo. I didn't see it with Ward and Kovalev. I didn't see it with, Crawford and Madrimov. I didn't see it with, Vasyl Lomachenko and Lopez, or Lomachenko and Devin Haney. And they even tried to give AJ Anthony, Joshua, and Fury the wins over Alexander Usyk, but they couldn't do it. So once again, all that is a bunch of horse shit.
Immediately after that, Shakur offered Lomachenko the biggest offer of his career, more money than he made his entire career, even when he fought Devin Haney. Bob Arum actually offered Lomachenko more money to fight Shakur than he made when he fought Devin Haney for Undisputed, and Lomachenko turned it down. His excuse...
And Lomachenko certainly did. And I remember that Lomachenko overall, once again, at this point in time in his career, he does not seem to want to fight Shakur Stevenson, or at least both Gervonta Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson. I think that if Lomachenko is going to fight one of them, he wants them to fight first, so he doesn't possibly lose to both of them, and he can kind of, kill two birds with one stone. Because if he does beat either Gervonta Tank Davis or Shakur Stevenson, he can say, well, I beat the man that beat the man. So he don't have to face both of them and wear himself out. Which I kind of get. He's not the only fighter. There's plenty of fighters that have done that within history. Mayweather has done that to a certain degree. That's why overall he has, a certain amount of fighters fight other fighters first before he fights them. Like he had Canelo fight Austin Trout first, and he wanted Thurman to fight Errol Spence before they possibly fight. And of course he had Maidana fight Adrian Broner. Not only to build up the fight, but to, possibly take out another contender as well, and to make that win case even stronger.
This was, I have unfinished business with Devin Haney. That was a bold-ass lie, though. Since Devin Haney moved up to 140 immediately after that, that's when the truth came out. Lomachenko ended up rejecting the Shakur fight for other reasons. His reasons was, I'm not motivated to fight. I may retire. Then, ironically, when Shakur...
And that is going to have to be held against Lomachenko to a certain degree. Now, that being stated, because the next part of the story is going to include Gervonta Tank Davis, for those of us that were around several years ago when Lomachenko was at the peak of his career, Lomachenko had called out Gervonta Tank Davis a multitude of times, but Gervonta Tank Davis really wasn't having it, and neither was Mayweather.
Or ended up fighting someone else. That's when Lomachenko came out to fight Kambosos. So he was motivated to fight Kambosos. He was willing to come out of retirement to fight Kambosos, but not Shakur. Then, even after that, the ducking still continued. When Gervonta beat Frank Martin and Lomachenko beat Kambosos for the vacant IBF title, Gervonta and Lomachenko were in negotiations to fight. However, Lomachenko turned down the Gervonta fight as well.
And he certainly did. And once again, if you're going to claim that you want to be undisputed and that you want that fight and that, you want to become undisputed at the weight class, and listen, at the end of the day, you have to take that fight. Lomachenko decided not to do it. He didn't have no injury, at least according to my recollection. He was coming off of an extremely dominant performance over Kambosos. No reason to take down that fight or to turn down that fight if you're actually serious. Now, once again, that being stated, do I think that Gervonta Tank Davis clearly did not want to fight Lomachenko several years ago? Yes, absolutely. But once again, Gervonta Tank Davis, he offered him the offer at the current moment in time. Lomachenko didn't take it.
Telling Gervonta what he told Shakur, I'm not motivated to fight. I want to retire. Well, if that wasn't shocking enough, if that wasn't enough ducking, reports came out that this was not the only time Lomachenko turned down the Gervonta fight. In fact, he had already turned it down multiple times in the past. In 2020, 2019, before he even fought Tio, Gervonta team reached out to Bob Arum to make the Lomachenko fight. However,
Well, I need to see some information on that because, once again, Lomachenko, from what I had remembered overall, he had called out Gervonta Tank Davis multiple times. And it was very apparent that Gervonta Tank Davis nor Floyd Mayweather, they did not want him fighting Loma at that time, because they thought that Gervonta Tank Davis was not yet a finished product, and that Lomachenko was at an absolute peak of his career, and that Gervonta Tank Davis fought him at the time. He maybe could have beat Lomachenko, but it would have been not confirmed. And Gervonta may have been a little bit too green at that time. I'm not sure, but Gervonta, that they were not trying to fight Lomachenko back then.
Lomachenko rejected Gervonta fight, stating that I don't want to fight Gervonta because he don't bring anything to the table. He's not a pay-per-view star. He don't bring a belt, etc., etc. Mind you, Lomachenko was acting as if he wanted to fight Gervonta up to that.
He called out Gervonta Tank Davis multiple times, AKHi TV. Stop bullshitting, man. He called him out multiple times. He called him out several times. He said he wanted to fight Gervonta. There was multiple times where Gervonta never mentioned of fighting Lomachenko. So come on, man.
That point. All of a sudden, when Gervonta called his bluff by sending him an offer, Lomachenko rejected it. And that was before he got beat by Teofimo Lopez. Now when Gervonta has a belt, now when Gervonta is the face of boxing, now when Gervonta only fights on pay-per-view.
Well, Gervonta is not the face of boxing. He's one of the faces of boxing, but Canelo Alvarez would still be the main face of boxing. And, you know, these guys have also been trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez for such a long time. Canelo really pisses these guys off because Canelo not only has a great resume, but he was the face of boxing for pretty much of this decade. These guys can't stand Canelo Alvarez's ass. And they tried for such a long time to allege that, oh, Gervonta, because of the Ryan Garcia fight, now he's over Canelo. And then take a look at his last fight. It pretty much bombs compared to the standards that it was supposed to do. He had David Benavidez on the undercard. He was fighting an undefeated black fighter and Frank Martin. It was supposed to do relatively well. And I think it only did about 350,000 pay-per-view buys, if that. Canelo in his last fight against Edgar Berlanga did about 650,000 pay-per-view buys. And that's not even the main fight that people were wanting. So once again, Gervonta Tank Davis, a big part of the reason why his pay-per-view numbers are not going so well is because people are getting fucking tired of these fights against fighters that they don't really want to see. Now, in my view, Frank Martin was a relatively great or good opponent. He's a championship level caliber fighter somewhat, but at the end of the day, once again, the fights that people really want to see are Haney, Lomachenko, Shakur Stevenson. There's no offense against Gervonta Tank Davis, but really up until this year, he really was not trying to get in the ring with a lot of those guys.
Debunking all of Lomachenko excuses that he made back then to why he didn't want to fight Gervonta. Ironically, Lomachenko still turned down the fight. Lomachenko no longer wants to chase his dream that he never accomplished because the competition is too tough. This is why I said on my previous video that Lomachenko's career is a failure next to Usyk. Usyk did everything he set himself out to do.
Well, AKHi TV is going to mention something like Lomachenko's career is a quote-unquote failure compared to Usyk. But then at the same time, he's going to say, well, Lomachenko really is better than Usyk. And, you know, a big part of the reason why Usyk never lost like Lomachenko did is because he didn't fight as good as competition. So AKHi TV, once again, this little bullshit that he pulls once again, he's not even going to put Usyk in a great category because he can't have that. He can't have non-black fighters being on the all-time great list or being remembered possibly as the best of their generation. That's a big part of the reason. They have to try to make you believe that Crawford is miles ahead of everybody. Now, once again, if you have Crawford as your number one pound-for-pound fighter, if you have him as the best of your generation, you have every right to debate that in my view because he's up there with anybody for his generation. But to say that Usyk or Canelo are just miles behind and that they're overrated and all this other bullshit, no. I'm sorry. I can't bite on that.
Lomachenko didn't, even though Lomachenko came with more hype than Usyk did. When Lomachenko turned pro, immediately old media said Lomachenko was pound for pound number one already, just with the eye test alone. Teddy.
That's not what happened. What happened was that Lomachenko was starting to become a champion. He became a champion in either one or two weight classes, and they were already claiming that Lomachenko would be a future threat for the number one pound for pound fighter. Now, Teddy Atlas, of course, was hyping up Lomachenko way too early in terms of that conversation because he didn't deserve to be over fighters like Ward or that of what's his name, Terrence Crawford, with the amount of fighters that he had on his resume, or at least the resume that he had on there. That's completely understandable. He was being a bit overhyped and overrated at that moment. But then later on, when he beat guys like Walters and Rigondeaux and Gary Russell Jr. and Jorge Linares, yes, he did deserve to be in that conversation, especially after Andre Ward had retired. And no offense against Crawford, but other than Julius Ndongo and Victor Postal, he wasn't fucking fighting anybody else.
Atlas, along with old media, pushed Lomachenko narratives all over the globe. Even though Lomachenko lost his second fight to Salido, he went on to fight nobodies, and old media had the audacity to tell the world that Lomachenko at that time was already pound for pound number one over Crawford and Andre Ward, who've been dominating for a decade. whipping the biggest names, especially Andre Ward at that time. Crawford
Whooping the biggest names, bro. Maybe you can say that about Andre SOG Ward, at least the biggest names at 168 and 175. You know, at least a few of them. But Terrence Bud Crawford whooping the biggest names, bro. Just stop. Like, I have some of these guys that try to get in this debate with me that Crawford, oh, he beat Ricky Burns and he beat Julius Ndongo and Ricky Burns are not A-grade level fighters, man. I'm sorry. And, you know, I had one person, you know, that actually brought up a good debate about, well, you said that Marlon Tapales might be an A- level win for Inoue. Why would you, potentially claim that? Well, because the fighter that Marlon Tapales beat in order to get to Inoue in MJ, who's a relatively talented Uzbekistani fighter, who's, you know, and Uzbekistan seems to be having a good amateur pedigree right now. You know, overall, when it comes down to it, a relatively talented fighter. That actually was a fight that everyone was excited for, Inoue versus MJ, because MJ's talent level, but then Tapales got in the way, and he pretty much, got 2 titles. Julius Ndongo, the way that he got his 2 titles, he got one over an older Ricky Burns that, in my view, really was always a B-grade level talent. He wasn't ever anything above that. He also never really had super great power, never really great movement. He was your regular British Caucasian fighter. You know, when that you usually see, might win a belt here and there. Was a 3-weight division champion, but, you know, nothing really overtly special in my view. You know, when it comes down to it. Then, of course, you know, Julius Ndongo, he beat Edward Troyanowski, someone who was a very stiff Russian fighter who really didn't have a great amount of talent. And then he ended up beating an older Ricky Burns. And then afterwards, he got knocked out in round 2, I believe, by Regis Prograis. You know, after he got knocked out by Crawford, of course. But once again, you know, that's why, once again, people keep trying to claim like Burns and Julius Ndongo were these A-grade level fighters. They were the best names of those divisions for the time, but they were not A-grade level fighters. I'm sorry.
just became undisputed at 140. Lomachenko dream. They told Crawford, "You not pound for pound number 1. Lomachenko is. The guy who got beat by Salido is." Right? This is why Lomachenko's career is a failure. Because with the hype he had, with the expectations he...
Well, you can't call Lomachenko's career a failure if you're objectively looking at it. But once again, AKHi TV is not talking from an objective standpoint. He's talking from a bitch standpoint. No offense against him, but once again, you know, he has that bitch energy because he's talking with complete emotion and resentment and bitterness. You know, he's not talking with a whole lot of sense of logic here. Now, what I will state is if you want to talk about the failure of expectations to retain the number 1 pound for pound spot, that's something that we can say with Lomachenko. We can state overall that, you know, he was a bit overhyped and overrated once he was starting to get compared to Mayweather and Pacquiao and certain guys like that. You know, but to state that Lomachenko just never deserved the number 1 pound for pound case, or that the only reason why he was ranked there was because he was a Caucasian or it was completely racialized, no, that's completely false. You know, or to state that his career is just a complete failure because he lost every big fight. Well, obviously that's not true because he beat Gary Russell Jr. and Rigondeaux and Walters and Linares, and then later on beat George Kambosos. You know, so I mean, come on.
He failed all of it. He did not accomplish anything. He didn't accomplish undisputed. To make matters worse, he got...
Right, he didn't accomplish anything, but he's the fighter that's, you know, the quickest 3-weight division champion of all time, was formerly the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world, beat guys like Guillermo Rigondeaux, Nicholas Walters, Gary Russell Jr., Jorge Linares, and George Kambosos, you know, but he didn't accomplish anything. Like, come on, man. You know, and once again, listen, if you want to criticize Lomachenko, you know, once again, for not, you know, living up to certain standards, once again, that certain people placed upon him, we can definitely do that. You know, that's completely fair. But to state that the man hasn't accomplished anything, like, come on, dude.
Every time he stepped up in competition again.
And that's another lie, once again, because when he fought Walters and fought, what's his name, Gary Russell and Rigondeaux and Linares and Kambosos, those were all looked at as step-ups in competition. Now, to be fair, Kambosos was coming off of a very shaky performance, and maybe you could debate that he was not quite the same after the Devin Haney fights, but pretty much the other fighters, they were looked at either the best point in their career or at a very good point in their career.
The guy.
Now, he did lose to Haney and Teofimo Lopez, 2 fighters that certain people would debate were the most talented fighters that he ever fought, but also what needs to be stated is that those 2 fighters were just clearly bigger than him as well. Does that give him a complete valid excuse as to why he lost? No, because if you're going to be compared to the Canelo level, if you're going to be compared to the Crawford level, to the Usyk level, but especially fighters like Mayweather and Pacquiao and Usyk and Canelo, fighters that have actually fought guys that are very talented and actually bigger than them, and they were actually able to beat them, then you can't be compared on that level. So Lomachenko cannot be compared on that level because he was not able to do some of the things that they did. Now, Crawford is a great fighter as well, but, the one thing that I will say about him is that I don't think that I've actually ever seen him in the ring with a super great fighter or a great fighter that actually was bigger than him. I think that Crawford really is a guy that eventually was going to naturally fit into welterweight anyway because the dude's 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach, and he was already rehydrating up to 160 and 140 anyway. So, I mean, he pretty much was a natural welterweight eventually anyway. But, it'd be very interesting. But, of course, he beat Madrimov. A fight that I'd really love to see would be Crawford versus Janibek. But to be fair, Crawford he might be getting a little bit too long in the tooth. He might be getting a little bit too old.
As he was supposed to be, from Salido, Teofimo Lopez, and Devin Haney. He lost all of these fights. Fast forward till today. Lomachenko, the captain of his Olympic class over Usyk, with one belt in the lightweight division.
Now, AKHi TV keeps saying overall that Lomachenko was hyped up over Usyk and that the captain of his Olympic team. Now, certain people may take a look at this, for those of you that did not watch his previous video, and say, oh, well, AKHi TV is trying to promote Usyk over Lomachenko. No, that's actually not what he's doing. Because one of the points that AKHi TV made is that Lomachenko was looked at as the best captain of his day during that Olympic team of all the Ukrainians, of all the talented Ukrainians. So what he's trying to make is that the reason why Usyk didn't lose like Lomachenko is because he fought weaker competition, so we can't put Usyk on the all-time great level. So that's the bullshit that AKHi TV is trying to make. That's why he made that point about how the heavyweight division was dead and all this other bullshit. Even though, once again, they put Deontay Wilder in the top 4, top 5 pound for pound. Remember that shit? They put him in the top 5, pound for pound, for defeating literal bums other than Luis Ortiz. But AJ Anthony, Joshua Fury, apparently never top 10 pound for pound on their list. The heavyweight division has been dead, for years. It's been dead ever since Deontay Wilder ended up losing to these guys. They had their heart completely stripped when Deontay Wilder ended up losing those couple times for Tyson Fury. Ever since that happened, the heavyweight division has been completely dead. And then when Anthony Joshua ended up losing to Usyk, and they realized that the two heavyweights of this, generation, that the best ones were going to be Caucasians, the heavyweight division has been dead for a long time for these guys because they have no one to root for.
He no longer want to chase his undisputed dream since the competition is too tough. We all can agree, if the 135 division right now had only European champions, if it was a weak division, Lomachenko would be...
You see that, AKHi is trying to say if they only had European champions. Which is so interesting because, once again, isn't this the same guy that claimed that Crawford was #1 pound for pound all the way back in 2017? Like, at least Lomachenko was actually fighting, or he had fought championship-level black fighters. Like, he fought Nicholas Walters, who was from Jamaica. He fought Guillermo Rigondeaux, who also was another amateur sensation, just like himself. Beat the shit out of him. Beat Gary Russell Jr., who would later on become an elite black American champion, at least for a little bit. Terrence Crawford had not fought one elite black-level champion, man. I mean, one can say Gamboa maybe if you want to count him as black, but I mean, I think he has black mixture, just like a lot of Cubans, but I don't think that he actually was a quote-unquote black fighter. Definitely not black American, of course, because he was Cuban. Then he fights Julius Ndongo, and African fighters are not really known to be some of the greatest fighters in all of boxing. They're known to be good at best, but not usually great, So, I mean, it is what it is. Please name me 5 great African boxers that you know, but, and I'm talking about great, not just good. But, when it comes down to, once again, but AKHi TV won't mention that shit. Isn't that interesting?
Ace and undisputed as we speak. However, because the division actually has real talent, since the division is deep, with legacy fights for Lomachenko against the likes of Gervonta, the WBA champion, Shakur, the WBC champion, Keyshawn, soon to be the WBO champion, that's when all of a sudden, this tough competition made Lomachenko retire. Since he don't want no smoke with these guys. The reason why Lomachenko...
What's also interesting is that Lomachenko is going to turn 37 next year. It's interesting because whenever they talk about Mayweather when he beat Canelo, they say that Mayweather was no longer near his prime and that he was a grandpa, which is bullshit. He was older, of course. He was at 36 years old, but that was debatably the sharpest performance of his career, and he still was looked at as the #1 pound for pound level fighter. Lomachenko clearly is not at the same level as what he was several years ago that he is today. But they're not going to mention that point because, once again, AKHi TV and these guys, they act like a bunch of bitches, but it is what it is. That's why I say you can't rely on these guys' analysis because they're never going to keep the same standards because they have a lot of bitterness.
Feels his record will improve from 0-3 against the best competition he faced to 0-6, with possibly 2 KOs to
Once again, Lomachenko, when he beat Nicholas Walters was looked at as a dangerous guy in that weight class, and he was looked at as the best guy in that weight class. Lomachenko versus Walters was supposed to happen earlier. Eventually it happened. It was looked at as a very great fight. Lomachenko ran through that guy and literally made him quit. And then, of course, against Rigondeaux, when it came down to it overall, he made Rigondeaux quit, And then also against Gary Russell Jr., he embarrassed him. So this bullshit about Lomachenko being 0-3, all that is a bunch of horse shit. Now, did he lose some fights in his career? Yes. Can you hold that against him? Yes. But to say that he just lost every big fight in his career, no. A fighter that lost every big fight in their career is Mike Tyson. Someone that every single time he was against an A-grade level fighter, whether they were the same size as him or not, he ended up pretty much getting trounced.
Devontae for sure, and Keyshawn. This is why Lomachenko chose retirement over chasing his dreams that he never accomplished, that he told his own kids about. Lomachenko actually admitted when he lost to Teofimo Lopez, he had a hard time dealing with that loss. He kept dealing with that loss for years.
Of course, and that's what happens with elite level boxers or really athletes that are super, super competitive. They don't like losing, and boxing, especially, it's such, a tragic thing because you can't really blame anyone else but yourself. And on top of that, you're getting your ass whooped. There are certain fighters that deal with a great depression after their first loss. Ricky Hatton had a great depression after he lost to Floyd Mayweather. Deontay Wilder, of course, he he came up with some of the most ridiculous excuses I've ever seen a professional fighter or a professional athlete ever make when they ended up losing. I mean, I've never seen a person literally make such dumbass excuses, anyway. But, then that continued. Overall, Pacquiao, of course, he made a certain amount of excuses when he lost. Fury, of course, is not handling the Usyk losses very well. That just happens.
And that loss...
And that's not me saying that it's okay to make excuses necessarily, but, that just happens with a lot of elite level athletes. They don't take losing well, especially in boxing.
Actually humbled him. Because after he lost to Teofimo Lopez, he changed his ways. This is what Lomachenko admitted on TV. And clearly, Lomachenko hasn't gotten over the Devin Haney loss. His confidence is gone, along with his dreams that Devin Haney took from him. And now he's left with nothing but being a story in the duck book. Lomachenko's greatest accomplishments are him ducking the best competition, since he avoided losses that way. That's the whole absolute...
No, that's not really the Lomachenko story. The thing is about the Lomachenko story, if we want to rank it objectively and logically, is that Lomachenko was a guy that at one point in time was considered the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and rightfully so, but he just couldn't hold on to that grasp. And there are just certain, athletes that are like that. Like, when you talk about tennis, at one point in time, Andy Murray, he had a couple of years to where he was looked at as the #1 player. But, eventually he just could not sustain it. Now, a part of that was because of injuries. A part of that also was because he was just not on the level of Djokovic or Nadal or Federer. Just is what it is. There are just certain things that are like that. In basketball, for example, there are guys that are one-time champions, or that are very good for a few years, but then they never return again. Like Kawhi Leonard, he was pretty much the best in the league after the Toronto Raptors had won, at least debatably, but then after that, because of injuries, and on top of that, he did fuck it up against the Denver Nuggets and other things like that. He could just not sustain it. That's how Lomachenko is comparable, in my personal view. He's a great fighter. Some people may even debate all-time great fighter. It's just that when people try to put him on the level of debatably the greatest of all time, or a fighter that would eventually enter into the top 10 or top 20 of all time, it was proven that he did not deserve to be in that class. And that's how you logically and objectively rank Lomachenko. But to just go to one spectrum or the other, to say that Lomachenko, that, the only reason why he lost those fights was completely because of size. No, it was a part of it, but he also lost because he just could not figure out the puzzles. It is what it is. And then of course, to go to the other side of the spectrum with AKHi TV claiming this bullshit about, oh, Lomachenko, his career is a complete failure and he lost every big fight in his career. No, that's not the case either. But once again, that's why you have to have a proper balance and rank things logically and objectively. And most people really don't know how to do that in sports because most people are fans, which means what? That they're infatuated and that they're basically in love or they completely hate those athletes.
Truth about Lomachenko's failed career. The old media was lying to the public about Lomachenko's undefeated career in order to promote him above Crawford as pound for pound #1. They told us that Lomachenko wasn't just pound for pound #1. He was also the greatest fighter since Muhammad Ali.
And that, of course, overall, once again, was overrating Lomachenko a bit because we had not seen where he would go at that point in time. So, once again, that, of course, was something where criticism is necessary. But once again, to state that his career is just a complete failure or that at one point in time that he didn't deserve the #1 pound for pound spot, no, that wouldn't be the case.
Arum took it a step further. He said Lomachenko is better than Roy Jones. He's better than Muhammad Ali. He's better than Floyd Mayweather. He's basically the greatest of all time. Which is why Lomachenko's career in the pros is a complete failure. Not because of what he accomplished, but because what he didn't accomplish with the height that he had.
Well, then that would mean overall that his career is not a complete failure. Because if you're going to compare him to Roy Jones and Floyd Mayweather and Ali and those guys, pretty much fighters that I all have within my top 10 pound for pound list of all time, then what you're stating is that Lomachenko overall is a relatively great fighter. Once again, that's like excuse me, that's like me saying overall criticizing someone in the NBA and saying that, oh, Nikola Jokic, he ain't shit. His career is a failure. Even if the standards overall were higher, like Aaron Rodgers, for example, I'm not going to claim that his career was a failure, but, he definitely underwhelmed in his career. That's maybe something that you can say. Like Aaron Rodgers, for example, later on, the fighter not the fighter, excuse me, but the football player that would actually be what Aaron Rodgers was supposed to be was Patrick Mahomes. Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes has the talent level of Aaron Rodgers. Maybe throws a little bit more interceptions than Aaron Rodgers, but he has about at his peak the same level of talent throw as Aaron Rodgers, but he actually shows up in the playoffs. He actually can take a team to win multiple Super Bowls and make multiple Super Bowl appearances. But Aaron Rodgers is still a top 10 quarterback of all time, in my view. He's still an all-time great. It doesn't mean his career is a failure, but you can definitely say and criticize him for certain shortcomings that he did have.
Told you guys, Bob Arum said that Lomachenko was greater than Muhammad Ali, Floyd, and Roy Jones. He was basically the GOAT until reality hit. With the opinions out of the door and the facts laid out on the table, go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comment section below.
Well, I think that this video was about 25% facts and, if not 15, and probably about 75 to 85% bullshit. But that's pretty much regular AKHi TV for you. But I just thought that I would talk about that once again because many people, especially if they did not grow up in that era, or if they did not watch the era, they pretty much just look at a channel or look at an analyst and pretty much just take that narrative and run with it. And then that's how a certain amount of narratives get repeated within history because most people really don't know what the fuck they're talking about, to really be quite honest with you. But it is what it is. But I grew up during the Lomachenko era, so I pretty much remembered what happened with all these events. Was Lomachenko perfect in terms of taking every fight? No, he wasn't. There were certain fights to where he did turn down. The narrative that he pretty much avoided the Orlando Salido rematch, no, that's basically false. He wanted the Mikey Garcia fight. Mikey didn't want it, really, in all reality. And Gervonta Tank Davis, that fight could have happened several years ago, but Gervonta didn't want it at that time. Now, to be fair, Lomachenko turned it down the most recent times, so he is going to have to be held accountable for that, but, is what it is. But once again, that's pretty much the whole history of Lomachenko. Now, the question is about Lomachenko is, where does he really deserve to be in terms of history? And I'm not really quite sure about that. Maybe certain people could put him in the Miguel Cotto or the Oscar De La Hoya, kind of picture. And certain people may say, well, that's a little bit too high for Lomachenko. Why would you say that he's there? Because De La Hoya beat guys like Chavez and Pernell P. Whitaker, right? But he was supposed to beat those guys. Those guys were decently smaller than him. So, I mean, and really, if we're going to be quite honest with you, Oscar De La Hoya lost almost every big fight in his career once he went past 135 and 140. No offense against him. But, that's why I always say Oscar was a bit overrated because the way people talk about him you would think that he actually beat Felix Tito Trinidad and Shea Mosley and Floyd Mayweather. Like, is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. What do I think about Lomachenko's career? I think that once again that he's one of these guys that's had #1 pound for pound potential, but because of course of certain shortcomings and his all-around skill set, he just was not able to keep it for a very long time. But at one point in time, he was the #1 pound for pound fighter for a very short time, for maybe about a year and a half, but still he was the #1 pound for pound fighter. But once again, is he Canelo? Is he Crawford in my view, or Usyk? No. And Inoue might also potentially surpass him a little bit as well, because Inoue is having a tremendous career as well, but he's going to have to build up his resume a bit more, but we'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I do believe that Lomachenko is a great fighter. Do I think that he's on my top 20 or top 30 of all time list? No, I don't think that, but he's definitely a guy that could potentially make my top 50, top 70 fighters of all time, debatably. At least within my top 100 for sure. But I'd have to really look at that. I'd have to see who I rank, because I'm not really quite sure, to be honest with you. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see what happens going on from here.